Hi, tonight's topic is going to be about the history of comic books, a little bit about when they first originated, how they first came about, and whenever the first characters first started coming to life. According to Wikipedia, the first ones were religious subjects through the 17th and 18th centuries. Then they began to tackle politics and the social life. One of the first comics was William Hogarth in the 1860s. The first real comic strip is usually acknowledged to be Richard Felton's Outcasts, The Yellow Kid, which debuted in 1895. Yellow Kid was also the first comic strip to use balloons as a place for the characters' dialogue. When publishers realized that comic strips could be broadened, the appeal of their newspaper comic features such as Crazy Cat, Popeye, Mutt and Jeff became standard. Most of the strips in the first decades of the 20th century were purposely humorous and became known as comics and funnies. Also, according to Random History, since the 1960s, the industry has been dominated by two major publishers of the superhero books, Marvel and DC Comics, the two best comic books that are out there. Marvel, also known as Timely Comics from the 1939 to 1950s, then Atlas Comics for much of the 1950s. The thematic element of the genre can be arguably traced back to the ancient Greek mythological god, and superheroes. An example of the modern comic book hero Flash draws from the Greek god Hermes with his winged helmet and boots. Then to Samson's weakness in the Old Testament, Erica echoes the vulnerability that afflict modern heroes such as Superman's kryptonite. Also, according to What Are Comics, comic books took off after 1938 when Jerome Siegel and Joseph Shuster created Superman, the initiator of the superhero genre that would remain the cornerstone of the comic book industry. When DC Comics introduced Batman in 1939, it pushed out the detective stories from DC's title, The Popularity of Superhero. In the 1930s, this led to the creations of the characters such as Wonder Woman, Captain America, The Flash, and the Green Lantern. Marvel Comics introduced the enduring character like the Human Torch. Also, according to Defining Comics, the 1970 to 1980s, also known as the Bronze Age, comic books no longer looked through the ideas, values, and conflicts of the society, but began to look at the form itself. Motivated by persistent criticism that comic book art was not great art, comic book artists began to experiment with color and page display. Comic books were still largely carried by traditional newsstands, but traditional book venues were rapidly replaced by chain stores. In the 1980s, the Iron Age, where it extends into the Bronze Age, where Daredevil came to life. Heroes seemed to have a grasp on their own sanity. Heroes seemed to be the subject of comic book stories rather than means to tell a story. Iron Age witnessed the death of numerous superheroes, including Captain Marvel, Batman, and Superman died in Lois Lane's arms. Now the modern age, which is present day, comic book industry began marketing new issue comic books such as Spider-Man and X-Men. During the 1990s, comic book became the top collector items, one less popular than stamps and coins. Within just 6 months, an issue of Marvel's X-Men sold a record of 8.2 million copies. Marvel had grown into a multimedia entertainment company, and currently the superhero is a golden boy of Hollywood.